Here's another dilation system where the circles are overlapping on the right side. You'll notice that the pivot is relatively at center, but in this particular system, I drew a red line. And this red line basically indicates an axis. So we've looked at axial systems in the past. So this is actually working somewhat in a hybridized system. In other words, we're setting the text along these circular shapes in concentric like circles, so it's dilating. But there's also an axis that's going to cut the circles to create a secondary layer of order within the system. And so this would be more of an intermediate investigation since we're sort of adding another structural element within it. You can see that I took the text and basically set the text into these circles and played with the size, the weight, and the scale, the shape of the text, the tracking, how much space there is between the letters. And I left the axis there just so you could see how this was basically framing the position of the text around or along the axis. Now you'll notice that these two lines aren't perfectly aligned with it. And the reason for that is that I wanted to show you how I would tweak the position of the text. Now before I go any further, you'll notice here's the same system. I've already cut it up. Let me go to wireframe mode so you can see that. So you can see they're cut circles. So how did I cut the circles? Well, I drew the circles first, and then I went to the scissor tool. You don't have to cut them, but I cut them. I wanted to have this sort of really clear understanding of where the beginning and the end is of the line. But I went to the scissor tool and I basically went to that position on the circle and I clicked on the path that basically cuts the path in half into separate little parts. And then I deleted the little section that I didn't want anymore. Drew a circle, went to the scissor tool, and I cut what I wanted or how I wanted it separated. And then I took the part that I didn't want and deleted it, and I was left with a partial circle. Once I had these circles arranged the way that I wanted them, I then went to my text, and you can see I have it stored here on the side, and I selected the line of text that I wanted to work with. I copied it, it's loaded in the pasteboard, and then I went to the circle where I wanted to place it. I went to my type on path, clicked on the type on path, hit Command V, and now my text was there. Now, I wanted to design the text even further, so then I went to my type tool, my type panel, and I increased the font size. And then if I wanted to change the position of it, you'll notice that the text, when it's on a path, has these handles that run perpendicular to the path that it sits on. So there's a handle right here at the beginning of the text. I just grabbed that handle and I slid it along the path to change its position. So in a sense, that's basically what I did with every line of text along each one of these circles. And then I stylized the type to make it appear or look the way that I wanted to, with some sort of sense of organization or hierarchy. You can see how I set the text there. So here is the same system. So all these are examples of this set basically evolving into this. Once again, this is starting to move from an intermediate phase into a more advanced phase because I'm now playing with shapes within the system. So I'm using some sort of background element to give me another layer of visual interest within the design. And then those shapes are also assisting me in establishing the hierarchy. You'll notice that I drew a background that basically follows the same axis that the text was sitting on, right? That's where I'm cutting it. That's where the circles were cut from. And then I created some new circles that I used with a really big stroke that are now acting as a background. And instead of leaving the text in black, I decided to reverse the text, which is also referred to as a knockout or a KO. So the text is in white over the really saturated background. You'll notice that depending on the combination of colors, white might actually be more contrasting and more visually interesting than black on it. So I have found that in warm colors, especially if they're very saturated, white really pops off of it. So you can see here on this magenta that the white is really emphasized. Not that the black doesn't pop, but the white definitely jumps a lot more off of it. The same thing would be true with a red. You'll notice that stop signs tend to have a lot of white letters over them. And for the same reason, it just has a lot of contrast. So don't forget, white is a possibility over colored backgrounds. You just have to experiment and see which one might be better for you. The last thing that I wanted to show on this particular system was how these two lines of text may not be necessarily aligned perfectly. So I wanted to correct them a little bit more. And so I'm going to select it here and to highlight it. And you'll notice that once again, I have these handles that allow me to control the position of the text. So I should be able to slide this to get it to align better or closer to this axis. Right? Or maybe I want it to align on the opposite side. Maybe I want to drag it over here. So it sort of seems to align with the axis at the bottom rather than on the top. This is an intermediate leaning into advanced example of the dilation system.